Hi, nice to meet you. Here is the second part of the movie recap Gotham. If you are interested in the first part, you can watch it by clicking on the card. This part contains the 3 stories of Gotham. Hope you enjoy it. Let's start. Episode 6. In the elevator surveillance footage, a student seems to be saying hello, but there was no one else in the elevator. Then he also seems to see something terrible. He was so scared that he sat down on the floor, and his head hit the elevator uncontrollably. However, when the police arrived at the scene, there was only a dry body left inside, and the dry body's clothes were not quite the same as the students in the surveillance. Not only that, but all the surveillance cameras except for the elevator didn't capture it. In other words, the student appeared in the elevator's security camera out of nowhere. Now the other party is also in the unknown. It was later discovered that, before the student disappeared, he had posted a post on the internet teaching people to use the elevator to travel through the next dimension. The whole operation needed to be done by one person between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. That night, Officer Sai, who was in charge of the case, came to try it himself. According to the rules, first press the 2, 4, 6, 7, 9 buttons at the same time. When the light went off, then go to the 246 floors in turn. The 2nd and 10th floors are not abnormal, but when he came to the 4th floor after opening the door is a dark outside. The officer wanted to look closer, but the opposite side appeared another self. Then the elevator door closed again, just as he was about to return to the 2nd floor. But a woman's hand suddenly appeared beside him and quickly pressed the button for the 10th floor. The officer hurriedly turned around to check, but the elevator was still only himself. Then the elevator also returned to the 10th floor again, but after opening the door, there is still no abnormalities around, until the elevator closed. The door next to the floor was lit up, the sign of the interdimensional, and this time after opening the door, there was a woman in the elevator for no reason. She was twitching all over. The high-frequency screaming around the police officer was also painful. Then the other party slowly turned his head, but what came into view was a face that was extremely distorted. At this point, the officer suddenly could not move, and the other side grabbed the officer's head and kept hitting the elevator. Soon the blood stained the surrounding, but the only person on the surveillance was the officer himself. The police arrived at the scene at dawn. The officer in charge of the case was the same Officer Sai. The elevator also left only a dry body, but this time, the clothes worn by the corpse resembled the police officer. That night, Min and his classmates also found this place because of the post on the internet. That is, the 2 girls in the 4th story. If you are interested in the 4th story, you can watch the video in the card. They seem to have forgotten that the first requirement for crossing the dimension is to do it alone. This concludes the 6th short story. In this story, the crossing is real. The story begins with a student on the security camera, but when the police arrived, there was only one dry body left. If you look closely, you can see that the clothes on the corpse, in fact, it is the same as what the assistant was wearing. In other words, at least 4 times in this story. 1 is the disappearance of a student. Secondly, the police assistant from another dimension crossed over and became a dry body here. 3 is that Officer Sai crossed over to another dimension and became a corpse. The last is the Min 2 irregularities. Here I even suspect that the 4th story may be because of their irregularities caused by the subdivision chaos to release the monster. Also, the way Officer Sai died. Do you feel familiar with it? Yes. The streamer in the 3rd story also died the same way. Both body cannot move and then hit the head, bleeding to death. Perhaps this is also a hint. The death of the previous webmaster may also be related to this story of dimensional crossing. Episode 7. Threshold. The wife is going back to her mother's house for a few days with her son. Before leaving, she specially instructs her husband not to tear down the spiritual talisman in the bedroom. It turns out that students and police officers have recently disappeared in their neighborhood. The residents in the neighborhood are on edge. The wife was worried that tearing down the talisman would bring bad luck, although the man did not believe in this stuff. But in order to reassure his wife, he readily agreed to do so. The next morning, the man just got up and found a strand of hair below the threshold. He was curious and pulled it out with force. As a result, a woman's scream immediately came from nearby. This also made him feel very strange. That night after work, the man suddenly felt that the home with a spiritual talisman to look strange, so he tore it down by hand. Late at night, blood suddenly seeped out from below the threshold, and also from the corner of the room crawled out some severed arms and legs. Until there was blood dripping on the face of the man, did not notice. Originally saw those limbs and arms, already very scared, but then there was a monster in front of him that was indistinguishable from a male and a female. Step by step, He was approaching the man, and the man has been scared to the ground. With a wave of the monster's hand, The 7th story ends here. In this story, the wife mentions the recent disappearance of students and police officers in the community. This is the part where the elevator is used to cross the dimension. As for the severed arms and legs and the strange-looking monster that appears in the second half of the story, we need to read the next story to understand. Episode 8. Birthday. There is a strange magician named Devil. Some shamans who believe in her will kidnap children and kill them when they are about to starve to death. This way they can capture the souls of those children for their own use. Over the years, many children have disappeared in the neighborhood. The murderer is the shaman in this story. It was the day that the shaman completed her ritual. She used the meat to trick the children into the jar and kill them. Immediately, the captured ghost entered the shaman's body. Not only did her whole body twitch and even her pupils were replaced with a new one, and the salt used to seal the ghost in the jar also turned black instantly. After that, the shaman buried the child's severed foot under a big tree. This place has also imprisoned a lot of dead spirits. One day a rich woman came to see her for work. The rich woman wanted her husband to die soon in order to take over her property. The shaman sent a talisman and said that her husband would never live through the winter. At that moment, the witch's body suddenly appeared abnormal, and he also sensed the child's ghost was a little difficult to suppress. In the evening, a woman came to the door asking for help to find the child. At first the shaman was really going to help, but the sudden commotion in the room made her realize that the child might have been killed by herself. As the candles in front of the altar went out, the witch's body lost control again, probably because she heard the mother's call. The child's ghost made a move to get rid of the bondage. The shaman realized this and hurriedly drove the woman out.
다신 찾아오지 말고 썩 나가!
That night the shaman was suddenly awakened by strange noises. He came out to see that the altar had been knocked over, realizing that she might not be able to suppress the power of the evil spirits. So she rushed to pray to the evil spirits to cover up. At that moment, the jar suddenly knocked itself over, and the black salt inside was scattered all over the floor. At the same time, there was the sound of a baby crying in her ears. At this moment, the witch suddenly and uncontrollably shoved the black salt into her mouth as hard as she could. Then she began to convulse. The face of a child protruded from her stomach. With a scream, the witch's stomach was instantly ruptured. It didn't take long for a baby to crawl out of it. The mother who lost the baby also chose to leave out of guilt. A new bud sprouted from the place where the child's broken foot was buried under the tree. Perhaps this represents another form of new life. This is the end of the 8 short stories, although the last part is only about the shaman, but it is the link between the previous stories. First of all, in the cab story, the news of the shaman's murder is broadcasted on the radio at the beginning. This shows that the second paragraph occurs after this one, and the severed arms and legs in the previous stories are actually from the children who were killed by the wizard. In other words, the sorcerer buried not only the broken feet under the tree, there should also be other children's severed hands. As for the monster, that is hard to distinguish between male and female. I think the probability is that it came out of the witch's stomach. The purple potato baby just grew up a bit, so I suspect that the story of the 7th episode of The Threshold may take place in the 8th episode of the purple potato baby born many years later, and the man tore off the talisman should also be the shaman gave the year, because the source of the power of the talisman is those imprisoned brats. So after tearing off the purple potato baby has grown up to summon. This is the second part of Gotem's content. If you are interested in the previous story, you can watch the video in the card. If there are any mistakes or omissions in the video, welcome to add in the comments section.